So welcome everyone to our open burning smoke control regulation, and we're lucky to have Cindy Walsh and Marcus Kellerhaus with us today from Ministry of Environment. We will be recording this webinar session, and it should be available behind the login area of our website. And we are going to have a new website in a couple of months that we're building right now, so it may be on the old one before we get it onto the new one. And if anyone has any questions during the presentation, feel free to put your hand up or to type it into the text box, and we'll take you can either type it out and we'll have Sue monitor that and she can pass it before the presenters, or we may be able to take you off mute if it's a longer question as well. If we do have questions that are very site specific, we may answer them offline, but we'll just monitor that as we go. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Cindy Walsh and Marcus. And if you guys wanted to give a short intro about your department within Ministry of Environment, that would be great.
Sure, I'll go first. My name's Marcus Kellerhaus. And Cindy and I are from the Environmental Standards Branch in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change Strategy, as we're currently called. So our group focuses on air quality, and we also have, on the air quality issue, we also have some regional staff across the province, but we're the group at headquarters that works on provincial regulations and basically sets provincial standards and guidelines for air quality. I'm the head of that unit, and Cindy is an air quality specialist in our unit and is our expert on this regulation and will be the main presenter today. So I'll be in support of Cindy, and I'll let Cindy just explain her role a bit.
Hi folks, thanks. Yeah, I'm Cindy Walsh. As Marcus mentioned, I'm with the Clean Air section and an air quality specialist within that group. So I started working on the open burning smoke control regulation implementation last year. And so I went through the whole season and have a lot of experience with what kind of questions came up in the last year, and is hoping to kind of share some of my insight on that today, as well as a walkthrough of the regulation. I'm happy to have Marcus here to support as well. Marcus was very integral in putting the regulation together, so he has quite a bit of extensive knowledge. So if you have any complicated questions, you can give us a try and we'll hopefully get those answered today. I'm going to turn off my webcam and then start sharing the presentation. So just let me know if it can be seen properly by everybody. I go into slideshow here. I understand
that looks great.
The bottom of the slide has been cut off and there's not much I can do about that at this point. Okay, so I'm going to get started.
There's likely to be a ministry name change soon anyway, so it's okay.
Oh, sorry, did I?
Here we go. That's good.
All right, here we go. Okay, so today, as I mentioned, I'm going to go a little bit into the history of the regulation, and then I'm going to go over the regulation highlights. I think overall, it's a big regulation. It's new. Parts of it are new and different than the last one, and so when you first look at it, it can be overwhelming. And then I wanted to just outline with what we learned today, a case study, of kind of a familiar case study of what the questions that we normally get are. And then hopefully have some time for questions or discussion at the end. And as mentioned, please, as we go through, you can, there's slide numbers on the slides, and you can note, I have a question on slide 2 or a question on slide 4, and hopefully we can go back at the end and then look at answering those for you. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of background on why smoke is a concern when we're incinerating vegetative debris. It does create a number of air contaminants. The one that we are mainly talking about is particulate matter. And it's a concern because it can be inhaled deep into folks' lungs. And of course, it depends on who you are and what your exposure is and what your sensitivity is to that particle pollution. But some of the respiratory issues that can happen are asthma, if prolonged exposures, lung cancer possibly, wheezing, coughing, shortness of breath. I think we've all hung our head over the campfire for too long and can find the immediate effects of that, but there is longer term health risks as well. So just to put it into context, why we have a regulation that is centered on open burning is because open burning is the largest source of particulate matter, PM2.5, that's the small particles, in British Columbia. So by source, open burning, you can see, is quite more significant than industry, wood heating, or transportation. So it really shows why we needed to have a regulation that is intended to minimize the emissions from this type of burning. So the Environmental Management Act is the overarching act, and then the Open Burning Smoke Control Regulation ends up being a regulation under that act. It was first enacted in 1993, and then there was a number of years recently where it was in revision, and then finally came into effect on September 15th, 2019. I would like to say that the timing of this was somewhat complicated because September 15th was immediately before or as the burning season started. So it didn't leave folks with a lot of lead time to get the regulation, understand it. Although we'd had a lot of consultation beforehand, the fact that it was actually enacted on that September 15th, we had to hit the ground running. So we recognized that last year and worked on promotion and helping people understand the regulation. And now that we've got through the first year, I hope that that understanding can even be further education can help people that are struggling with where to go here. And just to note that a lot of the requirements in the Open Burning Smoke Control Regulation are familiar. They were in previous versions, but there are some additional sections of this regulation which are different, and I'm going to illustrate those for you today. So how the Open Burning Smoke Control Regulation works: basically, if there's a regulation, we're not going to be permitting that activity. So the regulation is actually what authorizes the burning instead of having a permit for every single burn that you need to have. So the Open Burning Smoke Control Regulation, or OBSCR, as we call it, it forbids burning that's going to cause a high risk of pollution, and it allows burning that's going to be a lower risk to cause pollution. And we use a number of tools within the regulation to do this. So we want to burn away from people, and we use setbacks to do that. We want to burn when atmospheric mixing is better, and we use something called the ventilation index and ignition times to do that. We want to ensure that the burning is happening quickly and efficiently. We use burn periods. No burning in prohibited materials. This is no change from previous regulations. And we are also trying to move that material away from sensitive receptors, away from population bases, so we have an ability to move debris. Just wanted to also note, I'm not going to go into local bylaws or the wildfire regulation today. Wildfire regulation requires you to get a burn registration number in order to burn, and then also follow our open burning smoke control regulation. And local bylaws could be more restrictive, and you need to understand what those are in your local area. So just an overarching concept of new regulation is the smoke sensitivity zones. And this is brand new for this iteration of the regulation, so I wanted to go into it right away. So it's broken up the province into high, medium, and low smoke sensitivity zones. So you can look at the map beside there, and the pink areas are high smoke sensitivity zones. So immediately you'll say, well, there aren't very many. They are right around highly populated areas, so they don't comprise a lot of the population, or sorry, a lot of the province, but they are the areas where there is the highest population. So it ends up that a lot of people do end up being in that high smoke sensitivity zone. Medium smoke sensitivity zones are around smaller communities and around rural locations, and as you can see on the map, they generally follow transportation corridors. Then we have low smoke sensitivity zones, and that's the rest of the province, and that's areas that are farther away from communities and from people. So in the high smoke sensitivity zones, we have more strict conditions, and in the low smoke sensitivities, we have more relaxed conditions to burn. And this is to minimize the impact on population from smoke. So the other concept that I just wanted to talk about before we start into the regulation is the ventilation index. And this is always a source of confusion. What is this index, and what does it do? In the regulation, you are allowed to burn based on if the ventilation is good, fair, or poor. And most likely you need your ventilation to be good. We'll go into that a little bit later. But what makes good ventilation? So I wanted to go through a summer and a winter case here so we can understand what is going to make for good ventilation. I often get the question, oh, I can go outside, it's winter, it's a nice sunny day, and the smoke is going straight up. Why is it poor ventilation? So let's go to the summer case first. So in the summer, the sun is higher in the sky and the sun there's warmer temperatures. So the sun heats up the surface of the earth and it creates these convective cells. And those convective cells cause the mixing height or the well-mixed layer of the atmosphere to rise in the summer. And then we have wind speed. So you take your mixing height and you multiply it by wind speed, and that gives you your ventilation index. The issue in the winter is that we have less heating from the sun, so the surface is not as hot. There's less convective mixing, and that mixing height is a lot closer to the ground. In the case of an inversion, for example, that mixing height would be right at near ground level. So if you don't have a very good mixing height, you cannot burn. And even if it's sunny or snowing heavily, it may not have the appropriate mixing height to allow for proper dispersion of the smoke. And the ventilation index in general is just a measure of the atmosphere's ability to disperse smoke. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to look at the format of the open burning smoke control regulation. My first look would be like, oh my goodness, this is a lot of sections. I don't want to read through all of this, and I understand that. It is a number of pages long. It's not easy to just pick it up and understand where to start. So I'm going to highlight the sections that are of interest so that you can get out there and burn appropriately. And those sections would be part 1 and 2, which are for all burners to follow. And then we get to part 3, and this is called specific requirements for open burning. And here we have divisions 1 through 5, and each of these divisions is separated into a certain type of burning. So we have high, medium, and low smoke sensitivity zones, and that's what most of the burning in the province will be under. Then we have more specialized burning. Is it for community wildfire risk reduction? Is it for diseased vegetative debris? Is it for dry land sorts? Or are you using an air curtain incinerator? So you want to go to that specific division and follow the requirements there, not follow all the requirements in all the divisions. Parts 4, 5, and 6 are just general information. For example, if there's a burn ban, you cannot burn. And we have a number of schedules at the end as well. So today I'm going to go through parts 1 and 2 and part 3, division 1 and division 5 in more detail. And I'm happy to answer any questions on the other divisions as well. So going into part 1, this is the interpretation and application section. So we have in the beginning, if you read through a section and you can't figure out what one of the terms is, go to the beginning and look at the definitions. Definitions are pretty well laid out. In part 1, we also have the exemptions listed. For example, if you have a permitted site, that permit is still good. You do not need to follow the regulation. Your permit is grandfathered in. We have exemptions for domestic and agricultural burning size allowances. So if you have leaves, crop, stubble, and branches, and those are under 3 centimeters in diameter, and your burning is domestic, so domestic is on your residential property, maybe you need to burn for property maintenance reasons, then, and it's under 3 centimeters, so we're talking about twigs, piles of twigs and small branches, this is completely exempt from the regulation. And as I mentioned, you do need to check your local bylaws, but you do not need to follow the open burning smoke control regulation. When we're looking at branches between 3 and 10 centimeters in diameter, there are a few restrictions that you need to follow. You can't move your material more than 5 kilometers in that case. You can't burn prohibited materials ever. And there needs to be no burn ban in place. Now, if you have branches over 10 centimeters, the regulation does apply. And that is most of the larger burns are over 10, have a couple pieces over 10 centimeters. So even if you have one piece over 10 centimeters, you need to follow this. And then of course, no burning, as I mentioned, if there's a fire ban in effect or contrary to the Wildfire Act. The Wildfire Act does have a few types of burns that are allowed. For example, if you're burning for habitat enhancement, you'd have to look at the Wildfire Act to determine what you're burning, if you're burning specialized like that. Okay, so part 2 this is the general requirements everybody needs to follow in order to burn. Before you do anything, you need to look at the material you have and say reduce, reuse, or recycle. You need to see if you can minimize the amount of material that is going to be burnt. Burning is not your first resort, it should be your last. When you're building your pile, we ask that you minimize your smoke by making sure that your material is not very dirty. If it has a lot of soil content, it just doesn't burn as efficiently. We want to maximize the airflow through the pile, so making sure that you don't have really dense, muddy, wet material in the middle. And maximize the seasoned debris. Maximizing airflow, I also say that, build your pile size appropriately. And maximizing your seasoned debris. So this is the drier, more seasoned it is, the better it's going to burn. I'm going to go into that again in the next slide. Again, as I said before, again and again, no prohibited materials. Please don't throw anything else in the fire. And then airflow and mixing conditions. So even if you had a good ventilation index when you started, if you start to smoke out a population area, a work camp, a highway, or an airport, you must take effort to put that fire out, not add additional material, and put that fire out so that you're not further impacting. Yeah, thanks, Marcus. The waste discharge regulation is where we list the prohibited materials. Okay, so seasoned debris. There was a lot of questions last year about, well, what is seasoned debris? How do we figure out if our debris is seasoned? So there's a few in the definitions. There's a few ways to season your debris. So the first one is you can have it and you can measure the moisture content, and it needs to be no more than 30% moisture content. And folks came to us and said, well, how do we do that? And I would have to say back to you, that's up to you to determine how you're going to figure out the moisture content and keep record of that in case a conservation officer were to come out and question you on it. You need to be able to tell them how you did it and what your numbers were. The other option is that you can pilot for 4 months or longer, and you need to keep record of how long it's been piled. And then the other way to have seasoned debris is if it's from standing dead timber. Okay, so the regulation is focused a lot around setbacks. And this is, again, to minimize the impact to receptors, the receptors being people, hospitals, schools, businesses. So it's the standard setback in the regulation is 500 meters for residents and businesses and 1,000 meters for schools, hospitals, and community care facilities. We have a clause in there that says you may move your material up to 5 kilometers. And this is put in mainly to allow people to move their material farther away so that you can meet those setbacks. If you can't meet those setbacks, you kind of get kicked out of the regulation right away and can't be burning. But we do have another option for how you can reduce your setbacks from 500 meters to 100 for residents and businesses, and from 1,000 meters to 500 meters for schools, hospitals, and community care centers. And the additional requirements, and you need to do all of these, is that you need to make sure that the pile is piled with horizontal is less than 2 times the height. You need to record the date that the piles were made. You need to have no stumps. This was a big one last year. What am I supposed to do with my stumps? Well, you can well season them and cut them into pieces that are less than 50 centimeters, or you can remove them from your burning pile and have them taken away, chipped, or you can consider air curtain incineration for your stumps. The material needs to be seasoned. You need to give notification to all of those neighbors that are within those setbacks. And you need to have a good ventilation forecast. So this is only a 1-day burn that we're allowing with these reduced setbacks. The burn time starting 1 hour after sunrise and ending at 4 p.m. or 2 hours before sunset, whichever is later. So we recognize this is a small amount of time to burn. You need to make your piles so that you can burn within that time period. They cannot continue to smolder overnight. Okay, so now we're moving into part 3, and this is where generally I lose people. People are thinking too much information. I don't want to look at all this, but I'm going to try and break it down so it's not that complicated. So we're trying to look at the type of burning that we're doing and what kind of options or which division we can follow. So you see on the left-hand side, we have a column or a column down there with the type of burning. So is your burning for community wildfire risk reduction, or is it for disease vegetative debris? Or do you have a dryland sort, or are you using an air curtain incinerator? If none of those, then you fall under other burning. So most of the province's burning would fall under other burning. And you are, as you can see, the little dot beside other burning only falls under Division 1. So most of the burning in the province would be done under Division 1, high, medium, and low smoke sensitivity zones. If you, for example, go through dryland sort, you move over, the dot is under dryland sort. So you need to follow Division 4. If you're using an air curtain incinerator, move over to the dot. The dot says you need to follow Division 5. There are a few other ones, for example, diseased vegetative debris. If you can follow Division 3, which is specific to vegetative debris, but if you don't meet all those requirements or it's too restrictive for whatever clause you're looking at, you also could look at Division 1 or using an air curtain incinerator. So there are additional options in some of those types of burning. Okay, so I'm going to start with Division 1, high, medium, and low smoke sensitivity zones. First of all, you need to figure out what smoke sensitivity zone you are in. So there's a few ways you can do that. We've allowed a number of options so that everybody can find this information out without too much trouble. You generally do need to have a computer, but if you don't, you can come into an office and view the maps. The regional smoke sensitivity maps, you would click on them on our website and it brings up a map sheet, and then you can look at where you are in that area. The other options we have is you can also download a Google Earth file, load that up into Google Earth. It's a pretty automatic upload. And then you can zoom in on Google Earth to your location, and the shape files for the smoke sensitivity zones are there. And then we have a third option, which is our ventilation index interactive map. And this is what most people, I would say, are going to use to determine if they can burn or not. So what it does is it takes the smoke sensitivity zone and it overlays the ventilation index, and it tells you, it gives you, can I burn today? Yes or no. Can I burn for more than 1 day or less, or 1 day or less, or more than one day? So this is a really nice product. Gives you a no would be an orangey red color, so it's pretty clear, and you can zoom right into your area. And when you click on your specific area, it will actually tell you what smoke sensitivity zone you're in as well. So if you're in the high smoke sensitivity zone, we do have a number of burns per year limitation. You can have only 12 burns per year, and no more than 6 of those burns can be in 1 month. So you could do 6 in November and 6 in December, and then you were done for that year. The medium smoke sensitivity zone has unlimited burns. So that means you follow the burn period. Once your burn period is over, you could start another burn period. And the low is the same. So burn time and adding material is quite an important part of the regulation to know how long you can burn and when you can add material. So I just wanted to review a few things. So the ventilation index, I showed you where to get it on the internet. We could also have a phone number if you can't access the internet. You do need to be able to access either the phone or the internet to figure out your ventilation index. It's a number of zones across the province, and it needs to be obtained before burning starts. If you are in a different location, or you think that you know that the ventilation index in your particular location may not be representative of the actual ventilation conditions on that day, you can get a custom ventilation forecast for your specific area. It needs to be issued by an approved forecaster, and it needs to be submitted to us at OBSCR Custom Ventilation Forecast, CVEF, at gov.bc.ca. So I recommend that if you think that you are above that mixing height, your ventilation may be better than the general forecast is going to forecast. So those are the types of situations I would suggest you look into custom ventilation. Start time is when the first, I just want to go over the definition. Start time is when the piles are first ignited, and the end time, if you're looking over a circle for the bird's eye view, it's when there's no more than 10% of the burnt area is emitting smoke. So this is really a fire that's pretty close to being completely out, not going to smolder for hours and hours and hours. Okay, so we have a few options. There's a number of 1-day options, and then there's a number of multi-day options. So in the high and medium zones, there are 1-day burn options. In the high smoke sensitivity zone, to burn for 1 day, your material needs to be seasoned, your ventilation index needs to be good, And you can do a start time of 1 hour after sunrise and an end time of later of 4 p.m. or 2 hours before sunset. So again, you need to build your piles so that they can go up and be, be completely gone before the end time. The medium has the same set of conditions, except the material does not need to be seasoned. Okay, so multi-day burns is what most people seem to be doing, and the high smoke sensitivity zone has a maximum burn duration of 2 days. The medium, 4 days, and the low has 6 days. And then we looked at the seasons for high is the only smoke sensitivity zone that you need to season your wood, your debris. Ventilation index, if we go across the high row, it needs to be good today and forecast as good or fair for tomorrow. The ventilation index does provide a today forecast and a tomorrow forecast at the same time. So you only need to get that one forecast on the first day, but it needs to be good first day and good or fair for the second day. Forecast for the second day. Start time, again, I mentioned 1 hour after sunrise. End time is 4 p.m. on the second day. And then you can see there's some conditions for adding debris and igniting unlit piles. So the first day only, you can add debris up to 4 hours before sunset, and igniting unlit piles up to 4 hours before sunset. So this is not a table I expect anybody to memorize. This is like you figure out which smoke sensitivity zone you're in. You come and you look at this table, which summarizes the conditions for you. If you're going to go medium, you would follow that whole row across. And low, as you can see, the restrictions are quite relaxed compared to the high smoke sensitivity zone because you're away from sensitive receptors, you're away from people. So there's a 6-day burn period there, and you can note that the start times anytime, and adding debris and adding igniting unlit piles is also anytime. Just going to briefly talk about plans for community wildfire risk reduction, which is Division 2. So this adds a number of different restrictions on, so it does add a little bit of flexibility in the ability to remove or dispose of debris that might be causing a wildfire risk. So sections 11 and 13 don't apply if you're burning under this division. So you don't have to season your debris, and you don't have to follow the same setbacks. And the setbacks one is the really big one here. And it makes sense because if you have wildfire risk, it's often close to populated areas. And then 10 to 90 days before you start your burn, you need to submit a plan which has been endorsed by government. And that plan needs to have information about the location of the burn. It needs to say that the burning is the action in the plan, and that burn needs to be less than 1 day long. You need to notify everybody within 150 meters. That includes community care facilities, residences, and businesses. And your setbacks then are 50 meters from residences and businesses and 100 meters from schools, hospitals, and community care facilities. Ventilation needs to be good or fair. So here we have a little bit of flexibility, fair in this case. And the burn time is 1 hour after sunset, ending 4 p.m. or 2 hours before sunset, whichever is later. So definitely willing to discuss this division in more detail if you think that might be your case. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on Division 5, which is air curtain incinerators. And I'm doing this because last year we had a number of pictures come in from the conservation officers, which illustrated that some folks are not aware of what an air curtain incinerator should do or look like. So an air curtain incinerator, it's a device that's used to aid the combustion and reduce emissions. And it does that by directing this flow of air over a trench or a burn box, and that air basically is recirculated. So I'll show you a little diagram here. So you need an air source, you need an air manifold, and that air manifold needs to be directing the air down. And it's basically just, it's recirculating that smoke before it's emitted to the atmosphere. But for these to work properly, you do need to follow a few general guidelines. For example, if you're going to build a trench for an air curtain incinerator, it doesn't work very well in some parts of the province. A trench on Vancouver Island can be very tricky to do. It often fills with mud, or the walls collapse on it, and people think, well, okay, I guess I still dug the trench. No, that's not acceptable. That's not an air curtain incinerator. And you do need that air manifold. You can actually rent air manifolds that would go along the edge of your trench. And that air manifold does need to be appropriately running. It's not just a bunch of fans. It needs to be a proper air manifold that extends the duration of the trench or the burn box. So the conditions for using an air curtain incinerator: if you're less than 100 meters from residences or businesses and less than 500 meters from schools, hospitals, or care centers, you just can't use it. You can't burn. But if you're 100 meters to 1 kilometer from residences and businesses, or 500 meters and 2 kilometers from schools, hospitals, and care centers, you need to check the ventilation index, and as long as it's good or fair. So again, here's that option where you can burn if it's fair. You can start 1 hour after sunset, and you can add debris all the way until sunset. And that debris does not need to be seasoned. So this is where it can be advantageous to use an air curtain incinerator in a high smoke sensitivity zone. You're going to have more options with the fair ventilation, and you can add debris for longer, and and it's an option that people are starting to think, well, this is the only option I have, otherwise I'm going to have to move my material offsite. And then I just wanted to mention, if you're more than 1 kilometer or more than 2 kilometers, so that's 1 kilometer from residences, businesses, more than 2 from schools, hospitals, and care centers, you can burn at all hours. So there's no restriction on when you can load that burn box. The
Cindy, I was just going to interject too. There was a question about, can you burn stumps in an air curtain incinerator?
Yes.
And Marcus did answer yes, any vegetative debris. And you just mentioned too that it's not limited by any hour of the day as well, correct?
In this medium, so the orange area with you can add 1 hour after sunrise up until sunset. But if you're in that green area, you can load all hours. So the conditions that you need to be able to burn are, so it's a great option for stumps as well. And the stumps do pretty well in there. Conditions to burn is the opacity needs to be less than 40%. So that means you need to be able to see very little visible smoke. You need to be able to see through that smoke. If it's thick smoke, then you're not operating it properly. You can't operate it like that. Please don't overstack it. I have seen pictures of the debris just piled right over the top of the air manifold, and that doesn't work properly like that at all. It's better to load slowly and have that material incinerated and then add more. Blowers do need to operate continually. You need to follow the manufacturer's recommendations, and those recommendations need to be kept on site. So again, I just have the same things here. There's a few pictures of incinerators, air curtain incinerators in operation. And again, I really want to stress, you should see little to no smoke when in operation. So often these have been put onto sites where they are, where there are people around, people don't even know that they're operating. Okay, so then moving from air curtain incinerators just to a general question of, do I need a permit? This is a question we get, like, well, I'm going to do this type of burning, do I need a permit? And there are a few provisions in the regulation that do require permitting. So if you have a dry land sort and it's in the high smoke sensitivity zone, you do require a permit. The other facility that requires a permit is open burning at a facility that manufactures wood products. And then, as I mentioned before, any existing permits or approvals do remain valid. And overall, in general, this regulation is what authorizes burning. So we're not issuing additional permits for open burning, as it should be covered by this regulation. If you believe you have a special case, though, please let us know. I wanted to just touch on records. Records are required for Category 3 burns and for air curtain incineration. Category 3 burns, you need a burn registration number, name and address and contact info for burn location, any substituted requirement decisions, the ventilation forecast on the day, the date of the burn, number of piles, or number of air curtain incinerators that were ignited. The records need to be kept on site, need to be kept for 1 year, and this is the key one, need to be reproducible when a conservation officer has asked you for them. Okay, so just wanted to summarize the burning in high, medium, and low smoke sensitivity zones. The general setbacks there are 500 meters for residents and businesses, 1,000 meters for schools, hospitals, and care facilities. But if you reduce your setbacks by following that set of additional conditions that we talked about, you go down to 100 meters for residences and 500 meters for schools, hospitals, and care facilities. Once you've determined your setback, you need to determine your smoke sensitivity zone. And if you're in the high zone, you need to know that the number of days that you can burn can be restricted based on the size of your parcel. If it's less than 64 hectares and it's private land, you do have a maximum of 12 burn periods per year, no more than 6 in any month. Then you need to determine the length of time that you're going to be burning. If you're in the high, you have an option of 1 to 2 days, the medium 1 to 4 days, and in the low zone 1 to 6 days. Once you have that information, you need to follow the ventilation forecast for that particular, for example, high, multi-day, medium, multi-day burns. And then in that table we talked about, you can see that there is relevant burn time sections for that. Okay, so then I just wanted to give a general example to make sure that we are all kind of on the same page and we can put this into practice. So if you had a 30-hectare land on Gabriola Island, you're 700 meters from a residence and 1,500 meters from a school, you need to ask these questions. What are you burning? Can you meet the setbacks or move your material? If you can't do that, can you meet the reduced setbacks? What smoke sensitivity zone are you in? If you're in the high zone and you have a smaller property and it's privately owned, you may have burn restrictions. How much material do you have? So how long can you burn for? Is it piled and seasoned appropriately for the section that you're in? Have you checked your local burning bylaws? Do you have a burn registration number? And is the ventilation index favorable on the day of your burn? So if you're to go through this case and add yes and no's in, what are you burning? Only vegetative debris for this regulation, please. Can you meet the setbacks or move the material? In this case, because it's 700 meters and 1,500 meters, you're fine for the setbacks. You don't need to go to the reduced setbacks. What smoke sensitivity zone are you in? For Gabriola Island, you'd be in high. Is your property under 64 hectares and privately owned? Yes. If yes, so this means you have that number of days per year restriction, no more than 12. How much material do you have? How long can you burn for? For this case, it'd be 1 to 2 days. Is it seasoned? It needs to be yes. Have you checked your local bylaws? Yes, please. Do you have your burn registration number? And is the ventilation index favorable? If those are all yeses, then you are good to go for your burn. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. It's a lot of material to digest at the same time. I realize that, but I think it's also valuable for you guys to have a voice and to let us know how you're doing with the regulation and if you have any questions that we can help you out with. So I'd like to open the floor to that right now. And I'm not sure if there was any questions that came in, but maybe Sue or Megan could go through and just read them out if there are.
Yeah, and we had a question about variances, but we could talk about that offline. But in terms of the ventilation index, if someone's over on Gabriola, what's the best way for them to get their timely data? Through the website? Is that?
Yes, the website's updated as soon as the ventilation index is forecast for the day.
Okay, and another question from one of our Gulf Island members is who and how are the regulations enforced?
So they're enforced through our conservation officer system service. And so what happens generally is conservation officers are either triggered to a complaint and they go out and would inspect based on the complaint that came in from a neighbor, from somebody that drives by and says, I don't think this is appropriate, or they're doing, roving inspections of the area.
And just in terms of local bylaws, is the fire hall, the fire chief, kind of the best point of contact on the Gulf Islands?
Yeah, that's what we recommend, and we're working with this year, hopefully working with the fire chiefs a little bit more because it is a lot of information. So we're hoping to provide additional guidance so that they can actually hand information out or give information out, so it's a little bit easier and that there's more consistent information going out this year.
Okay.
Because the fire chiefs do end up being the main point of contact often.
Okay. And I don't know if anyone else has any other questions that they wish to type or to ask. We can take our members off mute as well if they had any questions.
One comment on the bylaws, and you guys probably know this better than we do, but as private forest land, your act exempts you from at least some local bylaws. So you know, when Cindy and I raised that issue, just do the research what the local bylaws are and whether they apply to you, I guess would be our advice. So
Yeah, that's a really good point, paramountcy around the bylaws. And then Lee Ferreira is also one of our members on Vancouver Island. If the property is more than 64 hectares and in the high zone, how often can you burn? Lee, maybe I'll take you off mute. If you just want to, if you did want to expand on that question, if you're talking in terms of day.
Yeah, I know.
days.
I just, in that previous example on Gabriola, you had the property, if the property is less than 64 hectares.
Yeah.
And in the high zone, you can burn up to 12 times a year. So I'm just curious, if your property is bigger than that, bigger than 64 hectares, what are the sort of the conditions for burning?
Yeah, so you just don't have the you follow all the same restrictions for the high smoke sensitivity zone, but you don't have a number of burns per year restriction.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
So you can burn for 1 to 2 days, and then once that's over, you can start a new burn period, and there's no limitation to the number of burn periods.
Yeah. Okay. I don't think we'd actually be burning that often.
It would be a lot of burning, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very generous. Yeah.
Very generous. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, I don't know if we have any other questions. But thank you, Cindy and Marcus. That was great, especially because I know we had forwarded you some material from some of the members, especially around the Gulf Islands, where you get into tighter land pieces and potential impacts with bylaws. That was really helpful. So thank you so much. And as we mentioned, we will have the recording available on the website. And I do really appreciate that ministry staff were able to do this during interregnum, because usually there are quite a few restrictions around even doing activities like this. So thanks again. And yeah, we'll be sending out the notice for the recording to our membership in the near future.
Great, and I'd don't hesitate to use, especially that OBSCR at gov.bc.ca that comes to myself and Marcus, and we're happy to talk through certain scenarios or situations or complications too, because it's certainly helpful to hear from you where the sticky points are.
Sounds good.
Thanks very much.